Okay, so here's the wonderful video that talks about trimming your artwork down and getting it mounted onto board. Today we're going to take this little piece of artwork and we're going to put it on a board. I think the first thing that's important when we're talking about this is we want to get the artwork to be nice and square on the board, and we want to have a square board. To do that, you want to measure out your artwork and verify that your artwork is square. Let me show you a real quick, easy trick for this. If you get out a nice little straight edge and you just measure from corner to corner, you'll get your diagonals. If the diagonal measurement is the same, then you know that you've got the right amount. So I'm going to just measure this in here, and it comes out 12 3/4 plus a tick, and 12 3/4 plus a tick. So now I know that this is going to be square. If you take that measurement, that diagonal measurement, and it ends up being a little off, what it means is that you've got a polygon rather than a square. So if you take your measurements out from the artwork, then you're going to have problems there too. I guess the key thing that you want to do when you're working with blackboard is, as we start this measurement process, it doesn't matter what your artwork is cut to. I think that's one nice thing about this setup, is that if you start with and follow this procedure, it's real easy to create a board that's the right measurement every time without even having to measure this. This is 8 by 10, but it won't matter based on what I do next. Okay, so next thing we need to do is kind of look at the board and inspect it and make sure that this is going to be fine for the procedure. Now I can tell just by eyeballing this that I've got at least 4 inches on the height of this. I'm going to need at least 4 inches, since each side is going to be 2 inches around the artwork. So, you know, just eyeballing your piece, I can see that there's enough there. If you're not sure, you know, get out a ruler, and the thing that you want to do is just measure off from the edge of the board up and just double check and verify. Yeah, I've got more than enough here. I have more than about 7 inches. So the next thing you want to do with your board is inspect it and make sure that you don't have any corners that are chipped. You'll notice this corner is a little bent. And you also want to make sure that you don't have any scratches. Now, I do have some superficial scratching on the board here, but it's nothing really bad. Sometimes you can flip the board over and there's more or less scratches. I don't know if the camera's picking this up, but there's some pretty good marring on this side of the board, so I'll probably use the other side, but we'll see what we get when I cut it down. Okay, so the board checks out pretty close. There is this little tick on the edge though, so I think what I'm going to do is come over to the other side and see what it looks like. Oh, it's got a tick too. So let's come over to the top and see. And I guess this is a good point to show you the type of board that we're using. It's Letramax. The width here, it's between a 16th and an 8th. Again, I don't know if the camera picks this up, but it's a little thicker than a 16th, little less than an 8th. They do sell a thicker Letramax, but you really don't need it for the projects that we're doing, so you should be okay with this thickness of board. Okay, so next thing I want to do is just verify, since this is not a corner of the board, I do want to verify that it's square, at least enough for the artwork I'm working with. What I'm using is a carpenter's square, and this is a really handy tool. You'll see in a minute here I'm going to use it for helping align the image on the board, but it's also great for just cutting perpendicular angles. If you don't have a carpenter's square, that's okay. You can work with a triangle and a straight edge, and you'll get essentially the same thing. You would line up the triangle, figure out, you know, line it up so it's nice and running along one edge of the piece, and then you would just take your straight edge and butt it up against the triangle to get your nice perpendicular cut. So you can do this with the triangle and straight edge. I just like to do the whole thing with the carpenter's square. Okay, so I'm going to just run this over and double check, just running it up against the edge here. It's pretty much right on it. We're not building cabinets or anything, so it doesn't have to be wonderful, but as long as it's square for the distance that we need, that's okay. So I know that this section is going to be fine for what I need to do. Next thing I want to do is I want to measure out this artwork. I'm going to add 1/8 of an inch along the bottom, just because when you mount work, if you use the same amount of distance from the top and from the bottom, it'll tend to look like there's not enough on the bottom. So I always add just an extra 1/8 along the bottom so that it works nicely with the artwork you're doing. If you've got larger artwork, sometimes you'll move that out to 1/4 or even 1/2 an inch. But for this size, it should be fine at 1/8. So I'm going to just line this up in the corner. I'm going to get out a straight edge, and I'm going to measure out 4 1/8. Let's get this out of the way. So I'm going to just measure 4 1/8 and put in 1 tick mark. One trick to doing this job is to mark as little as possible on the board, so that you don't have lines that are all over the place. One of the hardest things about working with blackboard is getting a whole bunch of extra lines on there, because they're really hard to remove. So if you've got a good straight edge and you can get nice square cuts, then don't draw all over the thing. Okay, so we get 4 1/8 here, because this is going to be the axis that has the extra 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm just going to measure 4 out from this edge and put in a tick. So again, I just measure 4, come around, put in 1 little tick on the side. There we go. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and cut this down. Now, if you're really in need of getting this exact so that you don't waste any extra board, we could take another measurement. I could measure out from here to here, get that measurement and transfer it over here so I know exactly where to stop my knife. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let it pass a little bit beyond that. And in general, you'll always want to pass the knife a little bit beyond what the final is, just so that you have a nice clean corner cut, so it's sharp and not kind of broken. For the cutting I do, I like to use just a utility blade. It's safer, you can hide the blade, and the blade is also rigid. It's a little stronger than an X-Acto. You'll go through less of them cutting board. I do keep an X-Acto and a straight edge for cutting down artwork, so there is a place for that, and you could definitely use an X-Acto blade for this. You just need to be careful. The X-Actos have a tendency to flex, and you don't want that thing to flex up and run over your finger while you're doing this. Okay, so I'm going to rotate this around. And again, I'm just looking for that tick mark right along the edge here. I'm going to line it up, and I'm going to eyeball across from here's that tick mark. So I'm going to eyeball across here. And I'm going to just make another little minor mark here just as a reference point. One thing I want to point out is notice that I'm cutting on the waste side. And the reason is on that is that if I screw up and the blade comes off, it cuts into waste rather than cutting into our live board. So, well, it's not alive, but you know what I mean. So that's one trick, is always cut on the waste area and cover your live area. Now when I do this cut, I'm not going to cut it all at once. I'm going to come through it a couple of times, make multiple passes. So I'm going to just start, notice that there's my little reference point. I'm going to start just a little bit beyond that. When you do these cuts, make sure to do it on the tables that have this cutting surface. Don't do it on the standard tables or they'll get all nicked up. The other thing you can do when you're doing this is that the click you'll hear as it hits the plastic will be a real good telltale sign when you're through the board. Usually takes me about 5 or 6 passes. There you can see that the board moved there. So I think we're pretty much through. I'm going to take one more shot at it. It's much easier to take extra shots at it after or while you've got the blade down, rather than, you know, pick this up, move it around, discover that you have to do another pass again. So I'm going to just run through there, and I think I got everything I need. All right. Just double check, make sure that I've come far enough. All right. Now I'm going to swing this around and just verify if I lay down the straight edge here that it actually will pass across that. And it does. But now we have a problem. If I were ambidextrous, I could cut it with my left hand, but I'm not. If I cut it this way, I'll cut into the live area, and I could risk screwing up an otherwise good piece of board. So I'm going to just do the simple thing. I'm going to transfer this mark over to the other side, and the easy way to do that is just pick this up. Again, I have the tick mark right here. I'm going to draw it on the side, lift it around, draw it on the back, and then flip the board around. Now I can cut into the waist area right-handed. I won't mess anything up. So again, take the edge, line it up so that your finger runs and you can feel that edge with your fingers. So you just line it up again so it's nice and smooth along the sides. Now I'm just going to pick up the blade and again do about 5 passes. If you have a long board and you have to cut a long distance, the way to do that is start the cut and walk down with your hand along the ruler so that your hand is always braced against where the blade is. You get into problems if you're trying to hold it up here or down here and you cut and it'll slide the ruler. Now some rulers do come with cork on the back. This one doesn't, but this does, and that'll help give you a little bit of traction, but it's still no substitute for actually just having your hand near where the blade is going to be. So I'm going to hold this. The distance we're covering, I should be able to hold it nicely either on either edge. But if you run into a situation like that, walk your hand down and go nice and slow. Okay, so I'm going to just double check. Okay, it's all set. Again, we're just going for that little click. And right there, I went through, and I think we're through. Go. All right. So what you're shooting for with a board cut is that you should be able to run your finger down the edge and have a nice smooth cut all the way around without any fraying or cuts, or it shouldn't look like it was cut with a hacksaw. Some students will use the mat cutting room, and that's a other alternative. The reason I like to do this demo is that you could do this at home, you can do this anywhere where you've got a straight edge and a blade. Some people will also keep a little emery file and actually emery down the edge of the board if it's raising up. Sometimes it'll raise up with a lot of pressure based on how hard you're pushing down. Be aware that if you use foam core, you need to be extra careful when you're cutting either here, or especially if you're using the mat cutting room. Foam core will tend to get depressed as you're using it. So that's just another reason why not to use foam core and use Letromax instead. Okay, so we've got this board here, and the next step we're going to do is mark this up for the artwork and do a dry mount to make sure that it will fit properly. Okay, so we've got our board and we've got the little piece of artwork here, so we just need to make sure that it's going to place squarely. Now, a lot of students mess up by drawing all over the board again, trying to create a crop area here. What I'm going to do is show you, if we've cut the board square, we only need to put 2 tick marks on here, one for each corner of the top of the artwork, and then we can leave the rest of the board alone. And we're hopefully going to cover those tick marks up when we lay down the paper anyway, so you shouldn't have to do any erasing, any extra work on your board. Now this is where the carpenter's square comes in handy. The width on this side happens to be 2 inches, so it makes it very easy for setting up your measurements. So I'm going to just take this square now and lay it down across the top of the board, and if we measure from the edge 2 inches in, you'll notice here's the mark. It ends up being a 1/2 inch mark from the interior rule. So I'm going to just take a look at this, make sure that it's set up 2 inches, and come in and I'm going to just make a little corner mark, and I'm going to make it slightly inside of that little mark. So it's just a nice little corner. I don't know, John, can you see that okay? Just nice little tiny mark. I'm going to flip this around. Line it up again on the other side. And just get another corner mark in here, slightly inside to where we want it to be. Now, I'm going to lay this down, and I can tell right away that I took the wrong measurement on one of these sides. So we just have to resolve where that measurement is, but I didn't draw all over it. My guess is that it was probably on this side. Let me double check. You can just measure out from here. Yep, and sure enough, 2 inches. I measured at an inch mark rather than a 2 inch, or I'm sorry, 1/2 inch. So just come back here. Yep. What am I talking about, a 1/2 inch, and I ended up taking the measurement at 1 inch. But having these on the inside of the artwork doesn't matter now. Even with this bad measurement, I'll be all right. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is you just want to do, dry mount sounds a little too complex. All I'm going to do is lay this artwork down on top of these crop marks. Notice that as I move them in over the crop marks, they actually cover the mark because I did a good job of just bringing them in, just a degree. Now, with them down over the mark, I want to just take a couple of measurements and see. So it's 2 inches there. It's 2 inches there. If we come down to the bottom, we should get 2 1/8. We get a little less than that, but that's going to be all right. It's just a tad under 2 1/8, but it's still over 2. And then I'm going to check on this side, and it's 2 inches there. So just with those 2 tick marks, that's all I need for getting this set up for spraying. Now, when we do the spray mount, the key thing that you need to remember with spray mount is you want to spray mount the back of your artwork, not the board. That's the key thing. Some people will take in the whole board, spray over the entire board, and then lay their artwork down, and it ends up creating a nice gluey surface for everybody else's artwork to stick to. So make sure that you spray on the back of your surface here, and that's what our next stop is going to be, is the spray mount booth. Okay, so here we are in the spray mount booth. You'll probably hear a hum. When you come in here, make sure to turn on both the lights. One is for the lights, one is for the fan in here, so it'll pull the fumes out. If you have to do a lot of spray mount, I recommend taking a couple of breaks, because you will get lightheaded. When I've done this demo in the past, too many times a day, I've gotten a little lightheaded myself. Alright, so first thing you want to do is when you come in, you've got your beautiful piece of artwork here. Don't just come in and lay it down on the board here. The board has usually got glue on it. So underneath there should be a whole bunch of cut sheets of paper. And the paper is for you to use. Pick it up and go ahead and lay it down over this so that you've got a nice clean surface to spray on. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and set this down, but I'm going to just shake this up. It's just a standard 3M spray mount. There's other brands. There's Super 77, which is a favorite of many people around here. This one is okay. It's kind of weak. So your stuff really needs to be sprayed down for it to work well. Stay away from the movable spray mount where you can pick stuff up and put it down and pick it up. It'll just end up falling off the walls. If your work falls off the wall within 2 days, you know you didn't spray mount it well, and your instructor should mark you off for that. So anyway, shake up your spray mount. Next thing you want to do, without looking directly at it, is just make sure that the nozzle is fairly clean. Don't want to look at it because you don't want to get adhesive in your eye. Okay, so we get that cleaned off. The other thing I'm going to do before I actually spray it on artwork is I'm going to just spray over here. Because sometimes you'll get these little glue dribbles and stuff that'll come out when you initially use it. So just spray here, verify that it's spraying okay, and then go ahead and move your artwork into position. Notice that I didn't move it where I glued though. And if it's small artwork like this, I sometimes will keep a finger down just so it doesn't lift up and go all over the place. I try to get the corners a little extra. And the edges too, because that's where it tends to fail for you. Now, we have a problem. I spray mounted and I have some adhesive on my fingers, so you also have all this adhesive around the artwork itself. So what I need to do is just real gingerly pick it up with just the edges of the artwork. Just like that. And I'm going to walk this over and take it over the board. So I have the glue on the back of the surface. I'm going to lay it down. The trick of doing this is you want to lay it down just on those 2 dots. So try to lift with the rest of your hand, the rest of your artwork up. This can be kind of hard if you've got a lot of artwork or the artwork's large in size. So I'm going to just move this over into position just so that those tick marks are covered, and then lay it down. And I'm going to work it down from this side all the way down. There we go. Now I'm going to show you a trick here in just a second. Take a new clean sheet of paper from underneath the table there, set it over your artwork. And now you can really work this down without worrying about marring your artwork, especially if you have glossy color prints. If you just take your hand and rub over the color print itself, you might actually mar the print. So I'm just kind of working this over with the paper on top, and then we'll do whoever's up next in the spray booth a favor. We'll just lay this down on the table, and they can have a nice clean sheet to work with. But you'll see I'm really working around on the corners here and on the edges because that's where it tends to fail. But when you first lay down the paper, lay it down on one side and just work it over to the other side. All right. Now we want to examine it and just make sure, first of all, if you add too much spray mount, sometimes with thin paper like this, it'll start bleeding through. So I don't see any of that here. Next thing we need to do is just take measurements, make sure that I got them right. And since I dry measured, we know that it's okay as long as these guys come in. And these are coming in at 2. This one's right at 2 as well. And then right down here, it's a little under 2 1/8, but it's past 2, so we basically got what we needed. When your instructor is grading for this, that might be me or it might be another instructor, they're going to be looking for a couple things. They're going to check to make sure that you've got straight edges on the board. They're going to make sure that your artwork is cut well and it's not ragged. If I were to come in and grade this, I'd actually complain about this. I was using a pretty old X-Acto blade, and it's a little choppy there. I want to see nice clean edges all the way around. I always check to see if the paper sticks up on the corners at all, and you can see the paper isn't sticking up here. And then finally I just check to see if the paper's square on the board. And by square I just mean, you know, is it cattywampus at all? Is it tilted versus the board? So those are the things you're looking for, and again, I might have made this seem like brain surgery, but it really isn't. All you have to do, 2 marks on the board, and then I think I had a total of 3 marks for cutting. And that's all you need to get, you know, a really good piece, and this piece would go up on the wall if there were an assignment that called for a little smiley face and a goofy caption in pencil. So there you go. I hope this is helpful for you, and please let me know if you have questions, and your instructors might have different modifications as far as how far away from the edge they want it to be, but I think you could use this procedure in almost every case and get good results. This works if you have multiple pieces or just a single piece. Key thing is, always check your measurements. Remember, I had that screw up here, and if I had come in with glue and just laid it down, I would have had to start over. So always dry mount your stuff and just make sure it sits there properly before you take the time to glue it. So hope you found this helpful.